Welcome to Disney Coast to Coast, a show celebrating and questioning one of the most beloved entertainment companies in the world through honest, passionate, and clear-eyed Disney discussions. I'm Jeff DePauli, your entertainment-obsessed host with rose-colored glasses removed. Hello everyone, and welcome to the Season 9 finale of Disney Coast to Coast. Today in the show, we're discussing and celebrating the 30th anniversary of the Muppet Christmas Carol. Last December, I visited London for the first time, where I took a Christmas Carol tour, and I absolutely loved the passion that my tour guide Richard had for this story that I love so much. So I'm happy to say that Richard agreed to come on the podcast to discuss the Muppets' fantastic adaptation of one of the most famous Christmas stories in existence. Listen as we discuss what we love about the film, some small choices we question, and how well the Muppets depicted the ghosts based on Dickens' original descriptions. All of that and so much more is coming your way right now.
What makes Disney magic more magical? The holidays.
Hello, Richard, and welcome to Disney Coast to Coast, all the way from London. How are you today?
Not bad at all, and can I just say, God bless us everyone.
God bless us, everyone. Can I tell you something crazy? I just saw a stage production of A Christmas Carol in Southern California where they cut God bless us, everyone from the script. And I was just like, listen, I am not a religious man, but I was flabbergasted that Tiny Tim never uttered those words. And I was actually really pissed. It was an extraordinarily mediocre production to begin with.
But it's almost the most important line in the whole novella.
Yeah, I was like, yeah. And listen, if they had done their own sort of modern adaptation, I would have been, all right, you're making creative, your own artistic choices, but it was a very traditional production of A Christmas Carol with that line omitted. And I was just like, this is stupid. In any case, we're not here to talk about stupid Christmas carols. We're here to talk about the brilliant Muppet Christmas Carol. And Richard, before we jump into that, why don't you tell folks, I'm sure you don't remember me, but I remember you because just about a year ago, I was in London and A Christmas Carol is one of my favorite stories of all time. And so I did a lot of Christmas Carol stuff as I was there in December, and you were my tour guide.
I do every Christmas. I do my Christmas Carol tour. I've done it every year. I hate to say this now, but for 40 years, almost since Dickens wrote it.
Wow. So it's old. Your tours are older than the Muppet Christmas Carol.
They are.
Because that's celebrating 30 years this year. How did you get into that? And I assume you do other tours throughout the year. This is just the holiday tour that you give?
I do. I do Dickens tours. And of course, the big thing about Dickens is that Christmas Carol is perhaps his most famous and best loved work. It's certainly his most filmed work. And it's the one everybody seems to love. And I just thought, well, it's silly to do Dickens tours, but not do the Dickens tour, the second most famous Christmas story ever told. So I decided to start doing Christmas Carol tours. And people just liked them. People turned up and people seemed to like it. So I initially I did it in modern dress. And then I just thought, I really feel like, I suppose when you're younger, you're a bit self-conscious about doing it, but as you get older, you lose all shame. And so I started dressing up in Dickens in a Victorian outfit with stovepipe top hat and going around like that.
No, I loved it so much. One of my favorite things to do is talk to people about things that they're passionate about. And it was very clear the second that tour started that you were super passionate about A Christmas Carol. And one of the cool things about the tour is that you take us to the locations that Dickens writes about in the book. And it was just so cool. I got to tell you, it was my first time in London, and I did your tour. I went to the Dickens Museum, which was his old home, and I saw the Old Vic production of A Christmas Carol. And I was just like, this is just so perfect. I love it so much.
It's fantastic. And like you say, it's the locations, because the City of London, you've got the modern, you get all these modern skyscrapers, and then there's these little pockets tucked away, and you step into those, and it's like, I always get the feeling when I do that tour that I've gone back in time, and it's like I'm spending over an hour back in Victorian times, and it's almost like I've been through a night myself, and I've been haunted throughout the night. And then I step back onto the modern London streets, and I think, wow. And it's almost like I've awoken from a sleep.
It's very, very cool. So I am curious, when did you first fall in love with A Christmas Carol? Not the Muppet one, just like the story in general. Did you have to read it for school, or do you remember falling in love with it?
Yeah, it was when I was a kid, when I was young, and we're talking a long time ago now, but when I was young, the one Dickens thing that was always on at Christmas, the problem with Christmas Carol film versions is the copyright, because a lot of the ones that people think are the classics now, when I was a kid, were still copyright. So the ones that there weren't that many TV versions of it, there'd be readings of it. The one Dickens novel that was on every Christmas was Great Expectations, the old David Lean one. And I remember I was convinced that was a ghost story. And then my mother, I think it was my 8th birthday, either 8th or 9th, she bought me a copy of A Christmas Carol for Christmas. And I read it. And obviously, I didn't understand the politics of it, etc. But it was just such a fantastic story. And the nice thing about it, it's not a long story. It's a novella. It's short. So you can actually read, which is Dickens did it. He wrote that to be performed, to be read in one sitting. And you can just about do it today. Obviously in the internet age, we don't have the patience to sit around and read for 3 hours. But that's about it. And I just love that. I think I read it in about 2 days.
Admittedly, my introduction to A Christmas Carol, I'm pretty sure was Mickey's Christmas Carol, which was a very short version, but really good version. I like it so much.
I love that version.
Yeah, it's between 20 and 30 minutes long, so it's pretty short. But, that was my introduction. Then theatrical productions, definitely more so. And as an adult, I read the book and have read it many times, and it's so good. Now, as I was rereading it, preparing for this, I was just, looking at segments, and it was just like, oh, this is so good. Everybody needs to read it. And like you said, it's short. So really, everybody listening, go read A Christmas Carol.
Yeah, and there's some fantastic jokes in it as well that when you really read it, you start to get the humour, because it's almost like Dickens. Well, he says it at one stage in the novella that he's sitting there next to you, and these little asides that he makes. He's almost like a stage comic. He's making these little asides as he's writing, and that voice is still coming across to you from 1843 when he wrote it.
I try to see a stage production every year that I haven't seen before. And a couple of years ago, I saw a production where it was just basically one actor portraying Charles Dickens reading the story as he used to do. And I thought that was kind of a really interesting take on it. Let's jump into The Muppet Christmas Carol, because I believe you would have been an adult in 1992 when it came out. I was 10 years old at the time, and I remember seeing it in movie theaters. And obviously as a kid, it's the Muppets. I'm like, this is cool. But I am kind of curious, at that point in your life, you would have been a fan of the story. When you heard the Muppets were going to do it, did you think it was blasphemy, or were you looking forward to it?
I wouldn't say I thought it was blasphemy. I thought, to an extent, I almost thought it was beneath me, because you don't really think about it. It's not the sort of thing you'd think the Muppets would do. But then when you start thinking about it, you think, hang on, it's perfect for the Muppets. I didn't see it when it first came out. It was about a year down the line when I saw it. And I just thought, wow. And it's just such a wonderful version. It's got the warmth that Dickens had in the original. But because, of course, it's not actors playing the parts, it's the Muppets playing the parts, the nice thing is that they can do things that Dickens suggests in the novel that active versions of it can't do. For example, the Ghost of Christmas Present ages throughout the visit in the Muppets version, and it's only cartoon versions that tends to happen, because it's almost impossible to do it, and it's done so well.
Yeah, I've seen that tried to be done on stage as well, but as you said, it's usually just in the text that it's mentioned, but to actually visually see that happen is cool, and I do believe the first time I ever caught and understood that was the Muppet Christmas Carol, and I, of course, I saw it in movie theaters. I remember it very vividly, seeing it and loving it, and then again and again over and over on VHS, absolutely loving it. But the Muppet Christmas Carol, it is considered by a lot of people to be one of the best adaptations of Charles Dickens' original story. Would you agree with that, or is that
very
kind
much
of a
so.
silly statement?
Yeah, I think it's the one. It's got so many great things about it, and Dickens would be absolutely delighted. I can honestly say he would think, "Oh, this is fantastic," and he would be really proud of it, because I think, as I said earlier, it captures the warmth of Dickens' original. It's got fantastic characterizations. There's a lot of humour in it. The humour of the Muppets is fantastic. The best thing I think about it is Michael Caine's version of Scrooge. Michael Caine gets Scrooge, which a lot of actors and productions don't. A lot of actors portray him as being just a miserable curmudgeon. And Michael Caine's got almost a pathos about him that you can actually see in Scrooge. If you watch Michael Caine's eyes when he's being, for example, the exchanges with at the beginning when he's being bad-tempered, and Dickens the Muppets are trying to get us to understand what sort of person Scrooge is, because that's the important thing. We've got to start off hating Scrooge. That's what Dickens is doing, because if we don't hate him, we can't be overjoyed when he transforms later on in the novella or in the film. And Michael Caine gets that, and what Dickens is telling us is, and we get hints of it, that Scrooge is not naturally like that. Everything bad that's happened to him, almost everything bad, has happened at Christmas. So that's the reason he hates Christmas. And he's not naturally like that. He's been made like that. And that's what we start to understand when we get to the Ghost of Christmas Past, that he is a person who once loved life, was once, a happy person. And then gradually this need for security, for money took over. And Michael Caine gets that pathos, and very few actors do.
Yeah, one of the interesting things about Michael Caine is, number one, this was my introduction to Michael Caine. So I had never seen him on screen before as a kid. And for me, even still, when I see Michael Caine, this very well-respected, award-winning actor, first thing that pops into my mind is still the Muppet Christmas Carol, Ebenezer Scrooge. So he's classic Scrooge in my book. But one of the other things I noticed while rewatching it is I find that a lot of people portraying Scrooge kind of, eat the scenery, for lack of a better term. It's a lot of shouting. It's a lot of, I don't want to say overacting, but it's just very big. And when you watch his performance, it's very small at moments. In cases where I'm not going to claim to say I've seen every version ever made, by no means, but and every other version I can think of, I'm like, oh, wow, that's a line that I'm used to hearing very demanding and loud. And he just is very quiet about it, but gets the same message across. And I think that's a good actor, right?
Yes, yeah. He underplays him. A lot of actors overplay him. They make him too miserable. And of course, if he's too miserable, there's nothing there to be reformed. There's nothing there for the spirits to do their work on. There's a clue in the novella very early on that a lot of people miss in A Christmas Carol, where Dickens hints that there's something in Scrooge that can be found, something redeemed. And it's the line where Dickens describes him as being solitary as an oyster. And that's something that's got an ugly, hard outer shell. But if you can crack that shell, you've got the pearl inside. And that suggestion is there. And I think Michael Caine, you can just see that twinkle in his eye, that almost knowledgeable, it's almost when he says some of the lines that you can see from his eyes he doesn't mean it. He's just being defensive. It's his defense against the world.
It's one of my favorite Michael Caine moments in the film, and he doesn't even utter a word. But there's this scene very much toward the beginning where there's a townfolk in his office, and he's basically saying, hey, I don't have the money for the mortgage, and, I can't afford it right now, and with the holidays coming, and you see Scrooge kind of just going about what he needs to do for the day. And he comes over, he picks up the Muppet and throws him out the door and shuts the door behind him, and then gets back to his work. And you can hear that character from outside the door saying, thank you for not shouting at me. And I was like, I always love that moment, because once again, it's just like that subtle decision of, I'm not going to yell at him. He's not worth my energy. I'm just going to throw him out the door. And, I'm sure that was a lot of direction by Brian Henson as well. But I just love it. He doesn't even utter a word, and he gets it across.
Exactly, yeah, and that's the great thing about him. It's as I say, so, I think you've got one of the problems that film versions have with Christmas Carol is that a lot of the actors who've played Scrooge are classically trained, and it's this English thing that I've got to be a posh Scrooge. I have to be like an old 19th century actor from the stage. And that, of course, Michael Caine doesn't do that. Michael Caine he's Michael Caine, basically.
Now, one of the really interesting things about the film is that if you strip away the Muppets, this looks like a super traditional version of A Christmas Carol. When you look at the scenic design and just the costumes and everything about the film is so realistic and so Dickens traditional as far as I know. It's just the Muppets that make it like zany and quote unquote kid friendly, but it really is just a Christmas Carol.
Oh, very much so. I mean, it's the story. I mean, it's exactly in the whole story. Dickens. I mean, obviously Dickens didn't have a big blue nose, but Dickens is the narrator in the novella. And the Muppets do it that way when they've got the Great Gonzo as Charles Dickens and Rizzo the Rat. They sort of take over joint narration, but of course Dickens or the Great Gonzo is the narrator, and that's what Dickens does in the novella. He plays with us very early on. That first 2 pages when he's reminding us over and over again that Marley was dead, and he does all the jokes, and you get that in the Muppets.
Yeah, I think having Gonzo play Charles Dickens was so genius because, for a couple of reasons. Well, I think the main reason is because it allows you to get a lot of like the exact Dickens text from the book into the movie, where in other versions without a narrator, you're not getting the exact words. They might show you what Dickens wrote, but like in this case, you're getting exactly what's written in the book because Charles Dickens is a character. I don't know of any other version that's done this. Do you?
Not throughout. There's quite a few versions start off with Charles Dickens, and the interesting thing is so many TV and film versions. When they portray Dickens at the beginning, they portray him as the old Dickens with the beard. I mean, Dickens was only 31 when he wrote Christmas Carol. He was a rock star. He had he had long hair. His complexion was bright, flamboyant dress and everything, and so I think they get him wrong on that one. But then you lose him. He'll start the story, and then it goes into the story. Whereas the Muppets, you're almost following him round. I think there's a film that came out the other year called The Man Who Invented Christmas, and it shows Dickens writing Christmas Carol, going through all the torments. Because Dickens always said that he didn't write the novels; the novels wrote themselves around him, and he would act out entire parts of the novels, or in this case, the novella. And I think that's the thing that comes across in this, that you're almost watching the process. It's almost like a diary.
Yeah, I remember seeing that film and honestly being disappointed by it. I need to revisit it because I don't remember it well. But I remember like seeing the trailer and being super excited about it, and then seeing the film and being like, that was not what I was hoping it would be. But I do love the concept of it.
It's an interesting film because it shows Dickens' life at the time, when everything's going on around him and his father's trying to scrounge off him all. I mean, his father literally was so hard up for cash that he was going through Dickens' garbage bins and stealing his autograph or stealing his signature and then selling it in the local pubs. It was, Dickens was, as I say, a celebrity at the time, and his father was capitalizing on that.
It's crazy. So one of the other cool things about the Muppet Christmas Carol that I love so much, and anybody who listens to this podcast knows about me, this one leans into the scary, which I always appreciate. It is a ghost story. It has very scary elements, something that you wouldn't necessarily think, oh, let's put it in a quote unquote kids movie. But I love that the Muppets did put it in. I love that they were daring and did that. So it's an interesting choice, but kind of an awesome choice at the same time, I would say.
Very much so. And of course, the Ghost of Christmas Yet to Come, which is always it's such a, and I suppose it's one of the films actually that the actor who got the part of the Ghost of Christmas Yet to Come wasn't that bothered because he was a puppet, but because it's the worst one for actors to get because it's a non-speaking part.
Now, of course, I love the scary, so I want to talk to you about the ghosts today, and the 4 ghosts in the story, or I guess in this case, the 5 ghosts, because the first ones we see are Jacob and Robert Marley. Yeah. Of course, the original text is only Jacob Marley, but these are interesting because they are the only ghosts represented by existing Muppets. The others are all original creations for this film. So I found that to be kind of interesting, but I do want to read, I have the book in front of me, I want to read how Dickens describes Jacob Marley. He says, Marley in his pigtail, usual waistcoat, tights and boots, the tassels on the latter bristling, like his pigtail and his coat skirts and the hair upon his head. The chain he drew was clasped about his middle. It was long and wound about him like a tail, and it was made, for Scrooge observed it closely, of cash boxes, keys, padlocks, ledgers, deeds, and heavy purses wrought in steel. His body was transparent, so that Scrooge, observing him, and looking through his waistcoat, could see the 2 buttons on his coat behind. Scrooge had often heard it said that Marley had no bowels, but he had never believed it until now. No, nor did he believe it even now. Though he looked the phantom through and through, and saw it standing before him, though he felt the chilling influence of its death-cold eyes, and marked the very texture of the folded kerchief bound about its head and chin, which wrapper he had not observed before, he was still incredulous, and fought against his senses. So that's the way that Charles Dickens describes Jacob Marley. How do you think the Muppets did?
I think they did well. I mean, obviously they've got the 2 characters. They've got Statler and Waldorf that they want. I suppose they wanted the familiar, didn't they? And they're the perfect characters because Marley's almost an aside. So they're almost perfect for the part, because they're. I mean, in the Muppets, they're up in the balcony commenting on everything, and Marley's the one who basically comments on everything, gets the haunting started. So no, I think they did it well.
It is funny when a lot of people, if you ask somebody, how many ghosts are in A Christmas Carol, everybody, a lot of people will say 3. And I'm like, no, 4. And you're forgetting my favorite one. I love Jacob Marley. I'm a huge fan of that character. It's probably my favorite character in the book. But, the Dickens described these cash boxes and padlocks as part of, Marley's wardrobe. And we see that in this film. We don't get the pigtails that he talks about because, it's very much classic Statler and Waldorf look. We do get the transparent body. Now, one of the things that some adaptations do and others don't is the kerchief around his jaw. And I find that that's something that is often omitted, but such an important detail that I don't like it when it's omitted. And honestly, it took me years to even realize that that was part of his description because I saw it in like a later adaptation. But have you noticed a lot of adaptations just kind of delete that little description?
They do. I think it's because it's so difficult to do well. It can almost boil out or go over into being what's the word? It can almost go over into being ham acting. It is a difficult, obviously, the description is that he takes the kerchief off and his lower jaw drops to his chest or drops to his breast.
Yeah.
And of course, that's really difficult. I think Frank Finlay does it in one of the versions, the actor Frank Finlay, and he does it in one version and he does it quite well, but even he doesn't quite pull it off. So I think a lot of directors and a lot of actors think, yeah, perhaps just shelve that one.
One of the things that I find so interesting about Marley, and I don't know how or when this started because it's not referenced in the book until Marley's exit, but for some reason, Marley his entrance is always flying. I shouldn't say always, but often. This is a ghost that flies. And in the text, it really doesn't happen until he exits the scene.
No.
And there are definitely things that I feel like classics have done, and then everything that follows seems to follow it.
Yeah.
But I do find it interesting that so many adaptations make him a flying ghost, whereas not all the others are.
Very much. I mean, in the novella, it's very much that Jacob comes up from the wine cellar underneath, and that's the tension, because I think that's the fantastic thing about the approach of Marley's Ghost, is Dickens builds the tension. All the bells start ringing around Scrooge, and then he hears the chains dragging up from the cellar. And, of course, Dickens then reminds that it's a ghost story. He has that line that Scrooge remembered reading, that ghosts in haunted houses drag chains behind them. And then it comes up the stairs, and Scrooge still isn't too bothered. And then it comes across the landing, and then it comes into the room. And there's that wonderful bit where the candle then leaps up and says, "I know him, Marley's Ghost."
Exactly. So it's such a classic scene. I love it so much. But let's move on to the Ghost of Christmas Past, and I will read what Dickens had to say about that. It was a strange figure, like a child, yet not so like a child as like an old man, viewed through some supernatural medium, which gave him the appearance of having receded from the view and being diminished to a child's proportion. Its hair, which hung about its neck and down its back, was white as if with age, and yet the face had not a wrinkle on it, and the tenderest bloom was on the skin. The arms were very long and muscular, the hands the same, as if its hold were of uncommon strength. Its legs and feet, most delicately formed, were, like those upper members, bare. It wore a tunic of the purest white, and round its waist was bound of a lustrous belt, the sheen of which was beautiful. It held a branch of fresh green holly in its hand, and in singular contradiction of that wintry emblem, had its dress trimmed with summer flowers. But the strangest thing about it was that from the crown of its head there sprung a bright, clear jet of light, by which all this was visible, and which was doubtless the occasion of its using, in its duller moments, a great extinguisher for a cap which it now held under its arm. Even this, though, when Scrooge looked at it with increasing steadiness, was not its strangest quality, for as its belt sparkled and glittered now in one part and now in another, and what was light one instant at another time was dark, so the figure itself fluctuated in its distinctness, being now a thing with one arm, now with one leg, now with 20 legs, now a pair of legs without a head, now a head without a body, of which dissolving parts no outline would be visible, and the dense gloom wherein they melted away. And in the very wonder of this, it would be itself again, distinct and clear as ever. Now this ghost in the Muppet version, I would say, although it has some of the traits mentioned, varies tremendously. And frankly, I've never seen an adaptation that has created this ghost the way that Dickens has written it. That is quite a description.
Could you imagine being the costumer and the makeup artist and getting that brief?
Seriously. Well, I find it interesting because, I mean, this one is the like a child that they mention, I think, is the closest thing that we get in the Muppet Christmas Carol. But just talking about like the long arms and muscular arms and, 20 legs at one point, and this is something we don't even get a hint of. It's just, the creators have to make decisions because unless it's going to be an entirely CG character, which, wasn't the case in 1992, it's really, I don't know, it's the most descriptive ghost in the book. And I don't know, do you have any insight into why we get such a description of this ghost when the others it's kind of like a short mention of what they look like, but this one, he seems very specific.
Well, I think in a way that this is the ghost that's going to, A, it's going to change our attitude to Scrooge, and B, it's going to start Scrooge on his journey of salvation. And I think the thing is that because it's Christmas Past, the ghost of Christmas Past, it's got to be a ghost that's, it isn't old, it isn't young, it's the past. And of course, when you reach our age, or you're my age, and you're looking back, you're the old looking back. And so I think that's what Dickens is trying to get across in the novella. It's almost like your memories.
The other thing that he mentions is this bright light, which is something, having the cap to diffuse the light and such. It is interesting, the entrance in Muppet Christmas Carol, as you just see this extremely bright white light shining through Ebenezer Scrooge's bed curtains. And that is the entrance for this ghost. So they kind of touch on that as well. They touch on some things, they completely ignore some others,
yeah.
But it's a tough ghost to create based on the description.
Yeah, and I think it's a difficult one to play as well. It's a difficult part to play. Of course, what happens in the novella is that Scrooge wakes up and he's not sure. Well, first of all, he's not sure what day it is or what time it is. He thinks he might have slept through a whole day, and then he's not. Then he's thinking back on Marley, and he's trying to think. He's trying to reason with himself: was it a dream? Did it actually happen, or did I dream it? And then, of course, he starts counting the clock, and nothing happens. But of course, he thinks that before the clock has chimed 1, and then suddenly the room fills with light outside the bed curtain, and something pulls the curtain aside, and that's the ghost that Scrooge then observes. And that's when you get that wonderful joke off Dickens where he says that it's as close to him as I am to you, and I'm standing right here by you. So Dickens is telling us he's haunting the reader.
I love that. That's so great. The next ghost is the ghost of Christmas Present. Here's what Dickens has to say about that ghost. It was clothed in one simple green robe or mantle bordered with white fur. This garment hung so loosely on the figure that its capacious breast was bare, as if disdaining to be warded or concealed by an artifice. Its feet, observable beneath the ample folds of the garment, were also bare, and on its head it wore no other covering than a holly wreath, set here and there with shining icicles. Its dark brown curls were long and free as its genial face, its sparkling eye, its open hand, its cheery voice, its unconstrained demeanor, and its joyful air. Girded round its middle was an antique scabbard, but no sword was in it, and the ancient sheath was eaten up with rust. I love that description of the scabbard without the sword inside, and basically saying this is a peaceful ghost and not one that would fight. At least that's how I interpret it. Is that accurate?
Yes, yeah. And this is such a wonderful ghost as well, because, of course, this is the ghost where when Scrooge wakes up, he thinks, oh, it's not happening. And, of course, it takes a while for this ghost, well, not for the ghost to appear, because the ghost has appeared, but Scrooge doesn't realise the ghost's appeared until he goes into the other room. And there, the whole room's changed into this forest of greenery. And, of course, in the Muppets, it's massive. It's a huge ghost, which is what Dickens would have thought. Whereas, again, that's something difficult to do in normal filming. You can often see that the actor who's playing that ghost is standing on a bucket with Scrooge next to him or something.
Yeah, he is described as a jolly giant in the book. So there's that they get right, and then he kind of shrinks down to size, which is an interesting way of doing it, and just making it so that he doesn't need to be a literal giant the whole time. Mickey's Christmas Carol does it with an actual giant the whole time from Mickey and the Beanstalk, which is kind of interesting. But I was looking in the Muppet Christmas Carol, and I didn't see the scabbard around his waist. And that was, I don't know, I just love that detail and description in the book. I wish that were a thing. He has like a rope around his waist. I didn't see anything other than that. Perhaps I missed something, but that is a detail not in the Muppet version. But the Jolly Giant they get right. The bare breast is not something that's in the Muppet version. We get, him wrapped up quite tight.
Yeah.
Because he's made of felt, quite frankly.
Well, and of course it's in that sequence that we get Robin is playing Tiny Tim. Robin the Frog plays Tiny Tim, and that's I mean, I think Kermit makes a fantastic Bob Cratchit. Of course, inevitably then Miss Piggy has to become Mrs. Cratchit. Exactly.
So good. The Ghost of Christmas Yet to Come. Let's see what Dickens had to say about this spirit. First of all, he is a lot of times people call him the Ghost of Christmas Future, which is accurate. Dickens refers to him both ways. I love, just the phrase, the Ghost of Christmas Yet to Come. Yeah. I wish more people leaned into that. I think that's such a great way of saying future.
It's fantastic. It's and of course it's accurate because it's yet to come, which is an important phrasing of it, because it's yet to come. But what is yet to come? Can Scrooge change it?
So it was shrouded in a deep black garment, which concealed its head, its face, its form, and left nothing of it visible save one outstretched hand. But for this it would have been difficult to detach its figure from its night and separate it from the darkness by which it was surrounded. He felt that it was tall and stately when it came beside him, and that its mysterious presence filled him with a solemn dread. He knew no more, for the spirit neither spoke nor moved. Now, this is the most accurate depiction in The Muppet Christmas Carol. I mean, everything written by Charles Dickens is seen on screen in The Muppet Christmas Carol when it comes to this ghost, which is pretty cool.
Yeah. The point about that is that Dickens' description, it's fairly easy to do. There's not a lot required of it. It's as I say, it's the non-speaking part, and it's a message. I mean, the message is that the future doesn't speak to us. We are responsible for the future.
I love that. Now, I have a question for you about one of the things that I feel like different productions just kind of make up and change. And at one point, I actually thought the Muppets got this wrong. But now looking back, I think maybe they got it right, or at least interpreted it one of the two ways that you can interpret it. Because when we talk about the ghosts appearing, Jacob Marley tells Scrooge that the first ghost will appear when the bell tolls 1. So they get that right. And then the second on the next night at the same hour. Now, in the Muppet film, we actually hear the bell toll twice for 2 a.m. as opposed to 1. So I always interpreted that as second on the next night at the same hour. So same hour meaning the same hour as the ghost the night before, which would have been 1 toll. But then I read it, I'm like, wait a sec, second on the next night at the same hour? Is the same hour referring to the term second on the next night? Do you happen to know what Dickens meant, and if we interpret it correctly? Or the Muppets, I should say.
It's a tricky one, that, because it's almost like Charles Dickens made a mistake. One of the things about Christmas Carol is he wrote it very quickly. It was written in 6 weeks. He started it in October 1843, and he had to finish it by Christmas. If he couldn't get it, well, he had to have it on the market by Christmas, because otherwise there'd be no point in writing a Christmas book in the middle of February. So it was written in 6 weeks. It was done really quickly. And there's almost like there are, if you get pedantic about it, there are mistakes in it. And Marley's ghost emphatically tells him he's going to be haunted over the next 3 nights. Just like you say, expect the first on so-and-so. And then, of course, when he wakes up on Christmas morning, it's all been done in 1 night. It's almost the confusion over time. And Dickens actually says that at the end, at the very end of Christmas Carol, there's a reference where Scrooge wakes up and he says the ghosts, and it's almost like Dickens is challenging the reader to say, you got it wrong, Dickens, you got it wrong, because he said, Scrooge says they've done it all in 1 night, but of course they can do that, of course they can. So it's almost like Scrooge has been through a time. But no, there's no real reason for it. It's just, I think Dickens is very hazy about it in the novella, and I think it's very much open to interpretation.
Yeah, because it could go either way. With second on the next night at the same hour, that could refer to the same hour as the night before, or the same hour where he says second on the next night. So I don't know, but I'll give it to the Muppets. At first I thought they made an error, but I was like, no, you know what? They just interpreted it a different way than I typically do, but either way really does seem to work. And then the third upon the next night when the last stroke of 12 has ceased to vibrate, which they get right in a really fantastic way. They really... they make it suspenseful, the gonging of that bell in that final scene. So.
Yeah, and of course the whole thing about Christmas Yet to Come is, it's, as Scrooge says, it's the one he fears more than all the others. Because the past, it's his past, so he knows the past. The present, well, he knows everyone hates him because that's what he wants. But the ghost of Christmas Yet to Come is the one he fears because he doesn't know what Christmas Yet to Come is. He's convinced the ghost is going to show him a much nicer him in the future. So that's so he's ready for that lesson, and of course it doesn't quite turn out as he anticipates.
Now, in the Muppet version, of course, they have to make some choices, and not everything from the book makes it into the movie. There are a few things, though, that I feel like are kind of big story points that are deleted from the film I'd like to touch on. Scrooge's sister coming to get him and bring him home from school in the whole past sequence. This is something that I feel like is deleted quite a bit in numerous versions, but I don't know. I feel like it's an important part. Any thoughts on that?
Very much so. I mean, she is so important because, first of all, this is when Dickens starts to get us to feel sorry for Scrooge in The Ghost of Christmas Past, where Scrooge is a solitary child in the classroom. And then comes that scene where it transforms for him. And it's his sister, Fan, who comes to collect him and say, Daddy, Father's so much nicer now, and takes him home. And of course, she is the mother of Fred, the nephew who comes in at the beginning to wish him a Merry Christmas. And you have that exchange between Fred and his uncle Ebenezer, although Fred constantly calls him Uncle Scrooge, and so refers to him by his surname. But she is an important part of it. And of course, one of the big mysteries in A Christmas Carol is, why does Scrooge detest Fred so much at the beginning? Why? And there's all sorts of suggestions in various other film versions that maybe it's because Fan died giving birth to Fred, and that's why Scrooge resents his nephew. So you get that suggestion in some film versions. But again, it's just the haste. It's the haste, I think, of Dickens writing A Christmas Carol. But no, I agree. She is such an important character, because this is where we start to see that Scrooge had an unhappy childhood, but the happiness was there in his sister. And so she's so much part of Scrooge's past.
Yeah. Another thing that was deleted is the mention of ignorance and want, which happens during the Ghost of Christmas Present. And this is basically upon his departure. He's telling Scrooge to beware of ignorance and want, which are represented by young children, I believe, normally. And this just doesn't exist at all. I find this is another thing that a lot of productions just omit. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is such an important lesson in the book, I feel like.
A lot of versions omit it because they think it's maybe too frightening, or it's too lecturing, that but yet they are very important. It's the bit where the Ghost of Christmas Present is about to leave, and Scrooge notices a claw sticking out from under its cloak and asks what it is, and the ghost parts its robe, and there are the two children, ignorance and want, and you get that warning from the ghost: fear them, but in particular, fear this boy, ignorance, and that's Dickens' lesson. It's sadly it's a lesson certainly in England that we're still fighting with.
Well, here in America too. So, yeah, I feel like it's such a short moment that could easily be added. It seems to be a choice that so many versions cut it, but I love that moment, and I wish it were in there.
I think they are also quite difficult to do. The version that does it is the Jim Carrey version. They have quite a scary. I mean, I one of the things I love doing is reading the Amazon reviews of Christmas Carol versions, and I think it's the Jim Carrey one that gets so many 1 and 2 stars from parents because it's traumatized their children.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say it's my favorite adaptation, but there are definitely things that version does that most do not, that I absolutely love, and it definitely has its merit for sure.
Yeah, but, you can almost see them though planning the Scrooge ride at the theme park.
Yes, well, that's the big problem with that film, and I've gone into this before on the podcast, but it was a film made for 3D IMAX, and that was its biggest mistake. Same thing can be said for Robert Zemeckis' The Polar Express. Yeah. It was the same sort of thing. I'm like, nope, you had a great story. You didn't have to theme park it, as you say.
Yeah,
so.
But at least unlike Marty McFly, at least Scrooge did it in one film, unlike...
Well, listen, Marty McFly deserved 3 films. We'll just say that. But in any case, the Cratchits, this is interesting, a change that the Muppets made. And this is getting into minutia, but at the end of Muppet Christmas Carol, we see Ebenezer Scrooge show up at Bob Cratchit's door for, with the turkey and the feast and everything. This is something that in the novella, he really doesn't interact with him until the next day at work.
No.
So I thought that this was just kind of an interesting choice. And I'm always find it fascinating what they choose to change and keep and delete and all that stuff.
It's something a lot of the movie versions have chose to do from about the 1950s was when you tended to get live versions of A Christmas Carol on American TV, which were financed by people like Chrysler and Alco, the foil people. And that is what Bill Murray mocks in Scrooged, the old live versions of A Christmas Carol. And they were the ones who started the idea that Scrooge would turn up at the Cratchits' Christmas meal. Because the whole point about Scrooge sending them the turkey is that Cratchit doesn't know where it's come from. And that enables Scrooge to then play the joke on him the next day when he turns up late for work, because Scrooge knows he's going to be late for work. And of course, it's the mystery benefactor. So I think having him turn up is a mistake, because the whole point about that is the Cratchits are going to have a good Christmas, but they don't know where the good Christmas has come from yet.
Exactly. So, there's so much to love in the Muppet Christmas Carol. There's quite a few changes, but I mean, that's just what happens. But it is super, super traditional. Like I said, one of the zaniest things about it is just having the Muppet characters in there, which is kind of the whole purpose. I'm curious, though, is there any particular casting of Muppet characters to Dickens characters that you really think just nail on the head, got it right, and in the opposite direction? Any that you might change?
My favourite has to be Fozziwig.
Yes.
I mean, it's almost like Dickens foresaw the Muppets coming, Fozzie Bear coming, because it's just you could just see. I mean, the other ones you think, well, who can we put in this part? But there's only Fozzie Bear for Fezziwig. And I think that is so well done. And I think the Statler and Waldorf doing the Marley twins, I thought that was a stroke of genius on there. What would I change any of them? I honestly don't think I would. I think, and I don't know what I sound like saying this, but I think it's the casting is expert.
The Fozziwig thing, absolutely. Like, that is on my list, is like, wow, that is a stroke of genius and so obvious, but absolutely brilliant.
Yeah.
But I gotta be honest, the Jacob Marley thing, I think I would make it just an original character, like he did, or all of the other ghosts.
Yeah.
I don't mind Statler and Waldorf, but I don't know. It's probably one of my least favorite decisions, and it felt a little bit like, oh, we got to get them in there somewhere. Where can we put them? Although I do like what you had to say about them and how they're always the ones up in the balcony off to the side, watching over the situation.
Yeah.
That is actually a really great point.
Because Marley's almost like, I mean, there's that line where Marley says to Scrooge that he doesn't know how he's seen him, because for 7 years he's often sat at his elbow. And Dickens says, it wasn't a pleasant thought to Scrooge. It's the idea that his partner's been sitting by his elbow all this time. And I think that's where they're perfect, because they're sort of this almost ethereal characters. They're making the comments on everything, and that's how I see Marley. Marley's the one who's interceded on Scrooge's behalf. So they are just the sort of characters who would think get involved.
Now, we cannot talk about The Muppet Christmas Carol without talking about the music of The Muppet Christmas Carol. Songs by Paul Williams, which, if anybody listening to this podcast for any period of time knows, I am obsessed with Emmett Otter's Jug Band Christmas. Paul Williams also wrote the music to that, along with, of course, Rainbow Connection and a lot of other work for the Muppets. And, of course, the songs are the things that everybody talks about with this film, but I do want to mention with a score by Miles Goodman, because the score to this film is stunningly beautiful. And I love even just the absolute first thing you hear, that da 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 da. I love when a little jingle or tune gives the sense of like classic Christmas, something that's been around forever and feels so fitting to the holiday season. Yet it's brand new. And I feel like that's what that little jingle at the beginning from Miles Goodman gives. I love it.
Yeah.
So the score is stunning.
The score's so, and I think that's the thing with film versions of A Christmas Carol. Not too many of them have scores, and many that do, or those that do, not all of them are brilliant scores. they go a bit over the top. I mean, Kelsey Grammer's one. It's an intriguing score indeed. But I think
was that the musical one?
It's the musical one.
Yeah, the one that Alan Menken wrote the music to, right? And Lynn Ahrens wrote the lyrics.
Yes, it's almost like they've got the album of Now That's What I Call Christmas Music, and they've just composed the score around it.
This is going to sound blasphemous on a Disney podcast, but I think that music sucks to a level that I can't even believe Disney legend and genius Alan Menken wrote. And even Lynn Ahrens, whom I'm a huge fan of her lyrics in Ragtime, Seussical, The Man of No Importance, huge fan. both of them, I listened to it and I'm like, this is your worst work ever.
Yeah.
It's sorry.
And it's a film that's so bad that even Kelsey Grammer keeps his eyes closed throughout it.
So Miles Goodman definitely did a much better job.
Yeah.
But so the songs from Paul Williams, we get Scrooge, which is like such a great introduction to that character and really sets up everything about him. I'm just going to list them real quickly. One More Sleep Till Christmas is so good. Marley and Marley. It Feels Like Christmas, which has become like a bit of a holiday anthem, it feels like, or at least should be even bigger than it is. Bless Us All, Thankful Heart, When Love Is Found, which we will get into in a minute. But I'm just curious, do you have any favorite songs in the film?
I think Love Is Found. I really do. I think the interesting thing about the film is, musically, is Michael Caine is not someone you associate with musical numbers.
Yeah, and from what I understand, he was a bit hesitant to take part for that reason. But it's one of those things like, okay, nobody expects Scrooge to necessarily be a great singer. Like, he can be mediocre as long as he carries a tune. If it was really that bad, they could have gotten a voice match in, which I don't believe they did. So it's fine, but it Feels Like Christmas, which is the Ghost of Christmas Presents song, is something that we have seen the Disney parks start using a little bit for the holidays. I really feel like this song needs to be an even bigger Christmas classic than it is. There are so many Christmas songs out there, but It Feels Like Christmas. Just, gosh, I mean, the song feels like Christmas, so I love it.
Yes, it's and like I say, it's unusual, because it's not. I was going to say it's not written as a musical, but of course it is, because it's a Christmas Carol and it's written in staves. So it's Dickens doesn't go for chapters; he goes for staves. Stave 1, stave 2. So it's written as a Christmas Carol. If you think about it, it lends itself to a musical format. And there have been some. I mean, I personally, I do. I think the Albert Finney musical version, I do enjoy that.
I've said for many years, I think that the Muppets honestly should be on Broadway. I think that there should be a Broadway production with the Muppets because seeing them live is unbelievable. And I think that the best way to do it is to put the Muppet Christmas Carol on stage. Yeah. I think if they did a limited run of that, it would be huge, massive, spectacular.
Yes,
and
yeah.
This is just begging for it. And even if they don't want to do that, I think a musical stage version should exist where just like this music exists in it, even if the Muppets don't. It's such great music.
Yeah.
But you mentioned loving When Love Is Found. Now, so this is such an interesting song because we do get When Love Is Found at the end of the film, sung by Scrooge and the rest of the cast. But this is actually supposed to be a reprise of the song When Love Is Gone, which is part of the Ghost of Christmas Past scene. And I'm sure a lot of people know the story already, but this song was omitted from the film. Yet it's so interesting they kept the reprise of When Love Is Found, but then they also play When Love Is Gone, like a pop version of it, in the end credits. So they deleted it from the film, but they still keep these references to it. So have you seen the When Love Is Gone sequence in the past?
No, I haven't actually.
Okay. So this is super, super fascinating. So it was deleted from the theatrical version. It was thought that it slowed things down too much, even though the filmmakers really wanted it. Some of the higher-ups at Disney were like, nope, you're getting rid of it. So it was deleted from the theatrical version, which is the first time I saw it. But to be honest, I don't remember it being deleted because my strongest memory is from the Disney VHS, which I watched 1 billion times, and the song is in that. So I actually didn't realize for many years that the song had been omitted from the film. The problem is that the VHS version was a full screen, so that standard 4:3 aspect ratio, like you would see on old TVs. So basically a square. So you weren't getting the widescreen When Love Is Gone. So although it was on the VHS, you weren't getting it as it was originally intended. We're getting a little nerdy here for a second. Then, in 2005, a DVD release came out where it was a widescreen version of the film, but it was the theatrical version, which means the song was not included, but they also included a version with the song, but it was simply the full screen version from the VHS. So even at that point, we got the song, quote unquote, back in on the DVD, but it's not widescreen. And then at D23 Expo this past September, we were told that, Disney Plus, the streaming service, would be adding it back in. So we're finally getting to see it in widescreen with the song.
And in a way, I mean, that's almost it's a tribute to Jim Henson, isn't it? Because it was the first film they made after Jim Henson's death. And so it's almost, well, he gets a memorial, doesn't he, or a mention?
He does, and we'll talk more about that during trivia time.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I love this film. It was an immediate classic the first time I saw it for me, and it's pretty astounding that it's still considered such a good adaptation. And I think you even mentioned it when I was on your tour, how much this is like one of the best adaptations of A Christmas Carol that exists on film.
Oh, very much so. I do a lot of Christmas carols now on the school curriculum over here, so a lot of schools do it as part of their what's called the GCSE over here, but the exams when they're 16, 17. And so many school teachers use that adaptation because it's the one that sticks closest to the novella. And it's a way of getting teenagers, because obviously, I mean, most teenagers, if you go, oh yeah, we're going to read a Charles Dickens novella, they go, oh right, okay, but now we're going to watch the Charles Dickens Muppets, we're going to watch the Muppets do it, and they go, oh right, and
exactly. So, folks, once again, if you've not read the original text, I highly encourage you to do so. It really is not very long. My guess, it's public domain, so you could probably just Google it and find the full text online, right?
Oh, yeah. It's there in every format. You can get audiobooks free of charge on YouTube. I mean, it's that's one of the things the Dickens descendants are, or some of them, are very miffed about, that he's out of copyright. None of his descendants get a penny for all. I mean, if you think how much money they would have made if he'd still been in copyright with Muppets, with all the film versions, they'd have their own private islands everywhere.
Well, but also it would be interesting to see how fewer adaptations there would be. Like, would the Muppets have made it? I'm sure part of the appeal is, hey, it's public domain. We don't have to pay for rights for this. So, there'd certainly be far fewer theatrical versions. So I'm grateful for that. But yeah, I can understand both sides there. But in any case, anything before we jump into some trivia, anything that you want to add about the Muppet Christmas Carol and your thoughts about it?
No, just that it's such a warm version. It's just it's such a delightful version, and I think and like you say, I think the novella itself go back to the original and just because it's one of Dickens. It's almost one of his. I think it's in a way his best written, in that the storyline is just so good and the way he tells the story, and I think a lot of people come to it when they haven't read it. They think it's going to be, it's just going to be Dickens going on and on and on and on, but it's not. It's playful. It's such a. It's not. I mean, we think it says it's a ghost story for Christmas, but it's not really a ghost story. It's a parable dressed up as a ghost story.
Well, the big question is it a dream or did it really happen to him, right? And it's funny because not until several years ago did I think my dad was like, it's a dream. And I'm like, wait a sec, what? I was like, I always took this as this legit, this is a fantasy that like legitimately happened to this man. I hadn't even thought that, oh yeah, maybe it is a dream, even though Dickens kind of hints at it a little bit. One of the things that I think a lot of adaptations do that kind of confirm or deny that is, and a lot of this is probably just for casting's sake, using the same actors, but you'll see like other characters from before he meets the ghost, like townsfolk who portray the ghosts, and they make it very known, as if like it was seeped into Ebenezer Scrooge's subconscious, and therefore it is a dream.
Yeah.
But without that, and that little detail doesn't exist in the book, I always interpret it as it really happened to him, unless the adaptation really makes it clear, no, this was a dream for him.
Yeah, I want to sort of, I'm just thinking it's a great pity that the sequel was never written, where we go like 2 years into the future and Ebenezer Scrooge has spent all his money and he's going, why did I listen to those ghosts?
I'm glad that doesn't exist. This is a story that does not need a sequel, and don't put any ideas in Hollywood's mind. Alrighty, well, let's jump into some trivia now.
Do you know the answer? Get your brain gears churning and play along. It's trivia time.
All right, before we jump into trivia, I want to remind folks that the 2023 Disney Coast to Coast calendars are now for sale over at DisneyCoastToCoast.com. You can get yourself a traditional wall calendar, a desk calendar, or a digital computer wallpaper calendar. It also makes a great holiday gift for the Disney fans in your life. You can place your order using the link in this episode's description. Now, Richard, do you want to hit me with a trivia question first, or shall I hit you?
You can hit me first, because we'll see if we've got the same one.
As discussed in The Muppet Christmas Carol, we see Statler and Waldorf play Jacob and Robert Marley. Now, Robert Marley is a made-up character since the original book only has Jacob Marley. But do you know where the name Robert Marley came from?
Would it perchance be Bob Marley?
Yes, it is. It's a little joke on the musician Bob Marley. Of course, the nickname for Robert is Bob, and they had a little bit of fun with that and named him Bob Marley, because why the heck not, right?
Indeed.
What's your trivia for me?
My trivia for you is, how many ghosts does Scrooge see?
Well, he sees hundreds because
Exactly.
so there's the four, right? There's Jacob Marley and then past, present, future. But then there is, when Jacob Marley exits, they talk about all the spirits surrounding him. And that's one thing that I will say the Jim Carrey version gets right, as that's one of few adaptations where you see the other spirits floating around and in the streets.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
That's one of my favorite trivia questions. Because when you say to people, how many does you see? Most people, a lot of people say 3. They go, 3, yeah. And then some people remember Marley, and oh yeah, 4. But almost everybody forgets that scene when Marley exits the room, goes out into the air, and Scrooge follows to the window, and the air is full of spirits going hither and thither.
Yeah, so wonderful. I actually have one more trivia question for you, if you're up for it.
Yes, indeed.
All right. Now, at the beginning of the film, we see that the film is dedicated to the loving memory of Jim Henson and Richard Hunt. Now, obviously, Jim Henson is the creator of the Muppets, who died 2 years prior. But can you tell me what Muppet characters Richard Hunt is most well known for performing?
Is that without Googling?
Yeah, without Googling.
I cannot.
Well, Richard Hunt was responsible for Scooter, Statler, Janice, Beaker, and Sweetums. Those were his big 5 characters. Scooter is not in the film. In fact, for a long time after Richard Hunt passed away, he actually died in January of 92. So the beginning of the year that the Muppet Christmas Carol came out, my guess is he was probably supposed to be performing in the movie, but he did not. But Scooter was like a retired character for a long time that has since been brought back. Statler we do see in the film, Janice we do see in the film, Beaker we do see in the film, Sweetums we do not. So 3 of his characters at that point were being performed by other Muppet performers. But so he is the second name. I know a lot of people, when they see that dedication at the beginning, they know Jim Henson, but they don't necessarily know Richard Hunt. So.
Yeah. And of course, Jim Henson lived over here in Hampstead. His house is down close, just off Hampstead High Street.
Yeah, how long was... I know he did, like, the Muppet Show was shot there. He spent a lot of time in London, right?
Yeah, he was... I'd say he had a it's a lovely little area, but Hampstead's where all the rock stars and actors have houses in Hampstead, and he was down there.
So that's where Charles Dickens would have lived if he were around today, then.
Well, yeah. The funny thing with Dickens was Dickens was almost nomadic. He didn't like he wasn't a very settled person. He had to keep on the move. He couldn't stick in one place for long. But he did go to when his sister-in-law Mary Hogarth died. He went to a farmhouse in Hampstead to recover because he was devastated by her death. And this is when he was just starting out. He was just started work on Oliver Twist. But no, so Dickens, he did like Hampstead. But Hampstead was weird in Dickens' day because it was where people went for holidays. It's like 15 minutes outside central London, but it's where he went for a holiday.
It's a little staycation back in the day.
That's it.
Excellent. Richard, thank you so much for coming on the show. Why don't you let folks know, just in case they happen to be heading to London, how they can take one of your Charles Dickens tours?
Well, they can go to my website, which is londonwalking.co.uk.
And what are some of the other Dickens tours you do throughout the year?
I do it during the year. I do a Charles Dickens tour around Southwark, which is where his father was imprisoned in the Marshalsea prison. And I also do a ghost walk around the bank. At the same area I do a Christmas Carol, but I do a regular Saturday night ghost walk. And Dickens gets a brief mention on it, but it's mostly about ghosts, because Christmas Carol's a ghost story, being a ghost story for Christmas. But this is just being a ghost walk for the rest of the year.
Excellent. Well, Richard, thank you so much. This was a lot of fun, and Merry Christmas.
And Merry Christmas, and God bless us everyone. And we won't omit it.
Exactly. Thanks for tuning into this episode. If this is the time when you normally stop listening, please don't, as I have some important info to share as we head into Season 10 of Disney Coast to Coast in 2023. First, I want to share more details as to how you can find the full-length version of the Muppet Christmas Carol on Disney+, including the originally deleted song, When Love Is Gone. Do not simply click play when viewing the movie. You must go to the extras and then click full-length version. If you simply click play on the main menu, it will play the theatrical version with the song omitted, and I highly suggest the full-length version in widescreen, as it's now available for the very first time. Now, if you're a fan of A Christmas Carol, I highly suggest another episode of Disney Coast to Coast that are recorded during the 2020 holiday season, where I chatted with my friend David, who has played Ebenezer Scrooge on stage for over 25 years. In that episode, you can listen as we discuss all of Disney's adaptations of A Christmas Carol. That is episode 793 of Disney Coast to Coast, and of course you can find it in the show notes. Before I get to the Season 10 premiere date, I want to thank all current patrons of Disney Coast to Coast. Thank you to this episode's executive producer, Mackenzie Jalen Arnold, plus other patrons Crystal Dudgeon, Erica Pearson, Jeremy Bennington, Robert Scontrino, Sarah Hops, Skylar Sandoval, Jeanette Mancini, Leah Cloney Mathis, Faith Casanova, Bonnie Bagley, Jeffrey Riccio, Gerardo Flores Tanella, Jared Benefield, Philip Elke, Ana Leonardi, Diego Parada Herrera, and Monet Pink. These folks are a huge part of the reason why I can continue to bring you new seasons of Disney Coast to Coast. If you have the means, I encourage you to consider becoming a patron and checking out the bonuses available to you by using the Patreon link in this episode's description. One of the bonuses is live stream Q&As that you can take part in. If you want your fill of DCTC during the hiatus, there will be a live stream scheduled for January of 2023. Now, as I mentioned, this is the final episode of DCTC Season 9. Season 10 will debut on Wednesday, February 8th, 2023, and Kyle will be returning the following week with the first House of Mouse headlines of the season. Knowing me, though, don't be surprised if you find some surprise bonus content popping in your podcast feed during hiatus, so keep your eyes on that. And don't forget to order your DCTC 2023 calendar and or check out this episode's show notes and so much more, all available to you in this episode's description. Other than that, folks, have a magical day, a Merry Christmas, a happy holiday season no matter what you're celebrating, and a Happy New Year. It's been my privilege sharing my Disney thoughts with you all season long. Till next time, bye!
Thanks for listening to Disney Coast to Coast. Have a magical day.
Disney Coast to Coast is produced and hosted by Jeff DePauli. Learn more about the podcast and become a supporter at DisneyCoastToCoast.com. This podcast is part of the Podcast Network. Learn more about this show, plus find more quality and entertaining podcasts at depodcastnetwork.com. That's DEPodcastNetwork.com.